The Vale family had chosen the most exquisite restaurant in the city for a simple lunch, or at least, what Lucas Vale thought would be simple. The crystal chandeliers sparkled like frozen fire above them, reflecting in the polished marble floors and the glimmering silverware laid out with military precision. Arya, the 3-year-old heiress, sat in a high chair near the corner of the restaurant, her tiny hands fiddling with the folds of her napkin. Her golden curls bounced as she looked around with wide, curious eyes, absorbing everything. Doctors had assured Lucas that Arya would speak when she was ready. Nannies had whispered about late talkers and developmental quirks. But today, Lucas couldn't ignore the hope thrumming in his chest. He had spent years chasing deals, acquisitions, and headlines, but no merger or business triumph had ever held the weight of this moment, hearing his daughter speak her first word. The restaurant staff had been subtly instructed to watch, to notice, to step lightly around this tiny miracle. The other diners tried to act casual, but there was an electric tension in the air. Some whispered, some stared openly. A photographer in the corner of the room pretended to check his camera settings, hard hammering in anticipation. Arya's lips parted slowly, almost imperceptibly at first. Lucas leaned in instinctively, ignoring the fine china and silver. The room seemed to hold its collective breath. Then it came, a clear, crystalline word that cut through the hushed murmurs of the restaurant. Mama. The word hung in the air like a sudden spark. Every head turned instinctively to see the source. But Arya's finger wasn't directed toward him. It wasn't toward her mother, who had left months ago. Her tiny, decisive finger pointed squarely at the young waitress who had just placed a fresh glass of water on the table. For a heartbeat, the restaurant seemed to freeze. Waiters paused mid-step, the clink of cutlery stopped abruptly, and even the soft music playing in the background seemed to falter. Lucas's sharp gray eyes widened, his mind scrambling to process what had just happened. The word was simple, the moment, unimaginable. Arya's innocent smile contrasted starkly with the charged silence around her. She repeated it again, almost as if testing the room. Mama. This time, her voice was even clearer, ringing like a bell. And in that instant, the ordinary lunch had transformed into something that none of them would ever forget. A word that carried with it the weight of a secret, a past, and a future that was suddenly impossible to ignore. Elena froze in place, the tray in her hands tilting dangerously. Glasses clinked as water sloshed toward the edge, and a few diners flinched at the sudden movement. Her heart raced so violently it felt as if it might burst through her chest. The word, the sound that had seemed so simple, had shattered years of carefully built walls. Mama. She had not expected this. Not today, not here, not in the presence of Lucas Vale, the man whose name alone could open doors or close lives. She had worked at this restaurant for only a few months, a temporary job she had taken to stay invisible, to stay safe. She had carefully avoided him, avoiding the world he inhabited. Yet here he was, and here was his daughter, her daughter, pointing at her with a certainty that made her knees weak. Lucas stood abruptly from his chair, his tailored jacket rustling as he approached, the sharp lines of his face etched with disbelief and confusion. Elena. His voice was low, controlled, but his eyes betrayed the storm inside. How is this possible? Elena's fingers trembled as she set the tray down on a nearby table. She had rehearsed the moment she would speak to him 100 times in her mind, but not like this, not with the child stepping forward, reaching for her with innocent trust. She shook her head, almost in denial. I didn't mean for this to happen, she whispered, her voice quivering. I wanted to watch her, from far away. I thought I was doing the right thing. Arya, oblivious to the tension cracking the air around her, toddled forward, arms wide. Mama, she repeated, louder this time, giggling at her own triumph. It was a word of love, of recognition, of belonging, pure and unfiltered. Elena felt tears spring to her eyes, blurring the world into a haze of color and light. She hadn't planned to reveal herself today. She had promised herself she would stay hidden, safe behind anonymity. Yet her heart, shattered and desperate, had betrayed her. Lucas reached out instinctively, but he stopped himself, frozen between disbelief and longing. The room's silence pressed in, a living entity. Every other sound, the clatter of silverware, the hum of conversation, the soft classical music, had vanished. There was only the girl, only the word, only the mother she had never seen grow. Finally, Elena took a shaky step forward, the barriers she had built over years crumbling with every heartbeat. I am her mother, she confessed, her voice barely more than a whisper, but enough to echo through the room like thunder. Lucas's expression shifted from disbelief to shock, and then, slowly, to something softer, something dangerous and tentative, like hope testing the air after years of absence. Arya clapped her hands, as if sensing the weight of her own revelation. And in that moment, the world outside ceased to exist. The restaurant seemed to shrink around them, as though the walls themselves were leaning in to witness the truth that had been buried for years. Lucas's gaze never left Elena's face, trying to read the emotions hidden behind the trembling lips and tear-filled eyes. "Explain," he said quietly, though the single word carried the weight of a courtroom and 1,000 unsaid accusations. Elena swallowed hard, her hands clenching at her sides. Memories, sharp and painful, rushed back uninvited. Years ago, she had been a young woman with nothing but ambition and a fleeting, reckless love. Lucas Vale had been magnetic, irresistible, a whirlwind of charm and power. The night they had met, nothing else existed. She had fallen fast, and for a moment, she had believed it could last forever. Then she had discovered she was pregnant. Alone in a tiny apartment far from the world of opulent parties and corporate deals, fear had consumed her. She had tried to reach Lucas, but he had been unreachable, caught in the whirlwind of his life and the woman he would marry shortly after. Panic had driven her to leave, to vanish without a trace. Every call she made went unanswered, every message ignored. And when Arya was born, complications had followed. Doctors had warned that the child might never speak, might never thrive in the way other children did. Elena had stayed away, convincing herself that distance was protection, not just for Arya, but for herself. She had watched from afar, never revealing her presence, letting Lucas believe his life had moved on without consequence. Yet fate had its own plans. The girl who had been silent for 3 long years had suddenly chosen to speak, at the exact moment, in the exact place, that would unravel Elena's careful silence. She had practiced her words in secret, perhaps guided by instinct, perhaps by memory carried in a tiny, powerful heart. And now, Arya had called out to her, the word, Mama, piercing through years of absence and denial. Lucas's hands, strong and commanding in the boardroom, now hovered helplessly in the air. He looked at Elena, at the woman he had never stopped thinking about, and at the child he had never known he had a right to love. You've been here all this time?" he asked, voice shaking. Elena nodded, tears streaking her face. "I had to be careful. I couldn't risk everything. I couldn't risk losing her again," she whispered. "But I watched, every week, every month. I made sure she was safe. And now she knows me." Arya giggled, unaware of the history, of the secrets, of the fragile lives that had led to this moment. She reached for Elena again, and in that gesture, decades of fear, regret, and longing seemed to collapse into a single, perfect connection. Lucas exhaled slowly, his mind reeling. The scandal he had feared, the betrayal he had imagined, didn't feel like that anymore. It felt like a chance, a second chance, to build a family that had always been meant to exist. The restaurant was quiet now, but it wasn't the tense silence of disbelief or fear. It was the fragile, electric calm that follows a storm. Lucas Vale stood a few feet from Elena, his usual posture of controlled power replaced by uncertainty and awe. His sharp gray eyes, which had once measured business deals and market dominance, now flickered with something softer, hope. Arya, oblivious to the weight of the adult world, wobbled forward, her little arms outstretched. "Mama," she chirped, giggling, her golden curls bouncing with each step. She didn't care about the scandal, the headlines, or the years of secrets. All she understood was the warmth of recognition, the safety of belonging. Elena knelt to meet her daughter, tears streaming freely now, unrestrained by fear or embarrassment. She scooped Arya into her arms, holding her as if she could shield her from the world forever. "I'm here," she whispered, rocking her gently. "I've always been here." Lucas stepped closer, and for a moment, the space between them felt charged with years of unspoken words, regrets, and lost opportunities. He looked at Elena, really looked, and saw not the young waitress who had vanished from his life, but the woman who had carried their daughter in silence, protecting her in ways he could never have imagined. He began, and then paused, searching for words that could match the enormity of the moment. "Come home," he said finally, his voice firm but tender. "Both of you, let's be a family. Together." Arya clapped her tiny hands, laughing with pure joy. Her innocent happiness cut through the tension like sunlight breaking through clouds. She had unknowingly bridged the gap between two lives torn apart by fear and circumstance, and in doing so, had rewritten the story of all three of them. Elena looked up at Lucas, gauging his sincerity, measuring the risk of trust against the possibility of love. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. "We'll try," she said, voice trembling but resolute. "For her, for us." The restaurant, once a stage for whispered anticipation, now seemed to celebrate the moment. Diners smiled quietly, some shedding tears, witnessing the unplanned miracle of a family reunited. Even the staff, who had been trained to blend into the background, couldn't hide their amazement. Lucas knelt beside them, brushing Arya's curls back from her face. "I don't care what the world says," he murmured. "She's ours. And so are you." Arya squealed with delight, hugging them both, her laughter a melody of innocence and triumph. In that embrace, the past's shadows faded, replaced by a fragile, luminous hope. The word, "Mama," had changed everything. It had exposed the past, but more importantly, it had opened the door to a future neither Lucas nor Elena had dared to imagine. And in that moment, surrounded by silver chandeliers and the soft murmur of a stunned audience, a family began to rewrite its story, a story of love, redemption, and second chances.